sinking 5 of those things.
Chocolate croissants are my jam.
Oh, really? I don't adulterate my croissants.
Really?
No, maybe extra butter. For me, it's all the savory stuff. Savory, salty. So it's croissants every once in a while. Or
have you had a chocolate croissant?
I have.
It's pretty goddamn good. You like
I'm
them?
with him. I'm all butter.
Really? Butter's nice.
Yeah.
Butter's nice.
I think the all butter for me justifies having, 3 or 4.
When I lived in New York, I used to love buttered bagels or buttered rolls. They do not have that out here for some strange reason. It's like a common thing. If you go to like a deli in New York, they always had buttered rolls. It was like just a roll with a lot of butter on it, and people would eat that with coffee.
Yeah,
out here, they don't have that for some strange reason. Or in LA, they don't have it either.
I like how in New York, when you get a soda, even at a little 7-Eleven type place, they offer you a straw.
Yeah.
It's one of the last civilized things in life to be offered a straw.
Do you know what I saw? There's a chart. See if you can find this of, how we're supposed to be not using plastic straws anymore because turtles are dying. People give you plastic, they give you paper straws.
I remember the 6-pack container, those plastic things you used to see.
Oh, yeah. Like the turtle where it like constricted his shell. Have you ever seen that one?
Yeah.
Like it got around a turtle when he was little, and as he grew, the shell became like an hourglass. It was really gross. But there was this chart of the countries in the world that pollute the ocean the most. And it's fucking stunning. And if we stop using plastic straws, we're not going to put a fucking dent in it unless they do. Like, we're not even close to number 1. We're not even close to number 6. Like, the leading countries that pollute the ocean, I think number 1 was Philippines.
I was going to say Southeast. Why would Southeast Asia have that issue?
I would imagine that when people are very poor, the last thing they're concerned about is not polluting. I would think that.
I've seen those images of those giant, icebergs of plastic junk.
Yeah.
And I always hope that's not real.
In 300 meters, turn left towards Kesslerstrasse.
It's real. Yeah, Boyan Slot is a gentleman who's been on the podcast before. Has developed this device for, it sifts the ocean. It's like, it floats over the top of the ocean, and it has this
Turn left towards Kesslerstrasse, then turn right onto B465.
That sucks up plastic, and then they take that plastic and use it and recycle it.
Turn right onto B465.
And make eyeglasses out of it and all sorts of other different things. Okay, so number 1 is China.
By a wide margin.
By a wide margin.
Wow.
Countries polluting the oceans the most, annual metric tons of mismanaged plastic waste and total amount ending up in global waters.
Continue on B465 for 11 kilometers.
This is fucking insane. So China is 8.80 metric tons. Indonesia's number 2 with 3.2. Philippines is number 3 with 1.9. You go all the way down to the United States, it's 0.30.
Well, China's got no excuse because their GDP's way up there. They could actually manage it. But some of these other countries, as you mentioned, are definitely lower GDP relative to the United States and China.
Right, for sure. Definitely Malaysia, Nigeria, but
China's got no excuse. That's incredible.
Yeah.
Is some of that them buying our stuff, though? Don't we sell our trash?
We buy it from them, bro.
Oh, okay.
I mean, trash.
Yeah.
Buy their trash.
They take it and we're like, here, you deal with it. I've heard of that happening. I don't know, not to a gigantic extent like that. I don't know about,
Right, for waste management, right? Yeah, they might have a company that handles that, perhaps. I mean, but also they produce so many plastic things. I mean, think about the amount of things that are plastic that are produced in China. That's pretty extraordinary.
I remember for a while there was a discussion about kids' toys with the coloring, and the toxins in plastics.
Yeah.
I guess I don't know if we're going to go there because we might as well, right?
Okay.
Well, it's interesting for starting 2019, I started posting things on Instagram. That's how I got my stuff out. Then I was going on podcasts, and now we have the podcast, right? But I'd stayed off Twitter largely until this last year when I started putting a lot of stuff there. So you put stuff there, you start reading stuff there.
Oh, no.
And then, what's been really interesting to me is I followed this whole lab leak thing, right? Because early in the pandemic, people in my field started chattering about that. I love exotic animals, not to own them, right? But I'm really interested in animal conservation. And so the pangolin is an amazing animal. They pinned it on the pangolin early on, right? Mm-hmm. And there were articles published in good journals, several of which I'm on the editorial board for. So early in the pandemic, there were papers coming out really fast about, the sequence of the virus in pangolins, which were being sold in the Wuhan market, et cetera. And I was pretty disturbed by this, mostly because of the pictures of the Wuhan market. The exotic animal trade is just, it's horrible, right?
Yeah.
Okay, close confinement, these are beautiful animals that there's no justification for this stuff. But pangolin meat is sold at, I forget what it is per pound, but it's a delicacy, and it's considered very lucrative and to get pangolin meat, of all things. There's actually a female pangolin meat influencer on YouTube, and so it's like it starts to look like pangolin meat ASMR. It's crazy and disgusting. So they're kind of mixing, sexy women with exotic meats from these rare animals. It's just awful. So I was going deep down this rabbit hole of trying to understand this exotic animal trade, and then there was chatter in my field about the fact that one of the members of the laboratory in Wuhan that was working with these, very high restriction viruses, had done her training in the United States, which is true, has a master's degree, but was running a laboratory, which is unusual, right? Typically, the head of a laboratory is someone with a PhD, MD, or both. Very rare for a so-called PI, a principal investigator, like me, or another Matt Walker, for instance, principal investigator, to have less than a PhD. The fact that she ran a lab, or was important in running this lab as a master's, with only a master's, is unusual. And then there was a lot of chatter in my field about the idea that it might have something to do with the fact that her significant other was a member of the Chinese Communist Party. And so, that laboratory had deep ties to the government and vice versa. And that's true of all laboratories in China, all laboratories. So the whole notion of the lab leak hypothesis was not foreign to scientists like me, who thought, my laboratory works with rabies viruses, adenoviruses, Sinbis viruses. None of these are as biohazardous as something like the coronavirus. But you work with these viruses, and you have to use, lab coats, gloves, bleach sterilization. You're careful, hoods of but human error happens. So I'm not at all convinced, one way or the other, that it was a deliberate leak. But the idea that it would leak from a laboratory to a scientist like me, who has what's called a wet lab, where with solutions and beakers and things of that sort, things happen all the time. Not in my laboratory. We're very careful, and everyone's checked up on often. But the idea that human error could cause this is like, it was an of course to all scientists.
Well, they had been cited in 2018 for violating safety protocols.
I mean, all it takes is, people might not be familiar with what pipetting is, but it's basically taking a little straw that sucks up, press a button, it sucks up some fluid. You move things, between little tiny vials. It can be done by robots too, but typically it's done by humans. And that's how you put in a centrifuge, spin it, take off a little piece of that, or take the pellet out of the bottom that spun down, this kind of thing. All it takes is one loose thumb, and it's on a lab coat. All it takes is that lab coat going on a rack. All it takes is somebody leaving work, putting their lab coat on there and touching that lab, and it's out in the world. Like, it's not that complicated. Right. So it doesn't have to be that somebody had a plan to let this out. It could be. I don't have any knowledge of that. But the idea that it would come from a lab, to me, is far more plausible than the idea that it came from some pangolin sequence in the Wuhan market. So I think we were going down the wrong path on this for a long time, and I thought, this is kind of bananas. And now everyone's so shocked. It's like, I think to people who work in biomedical research, of course this sort of thing could happen. Of course. Because human error is the cause of most of these kinds of things.
Well, it was very clear that there was a concerted effort to dismiss the idea that it came from a lab. And it wasn't logical, and it wasn't scientific. And they ignored all the evidence that seemed to point that it originated from that lab, including the people that worked in that lab who got sick. And now there's some new stupid story in the New York Times about a raccoon dog. They're saying it might have come from a raccoon dog.
The civet? Is that
No.
Okay.
So it's some sort of a raccoon dog. A civet is actually a cat.
It's like a ferret type thing, right?
A civet is like in the cat family, I believe. And it's that's where you get Kopi Luwak coffee from.
Oh, yeah, from the poop of the civet.
Have you ever had it?
Oh, it's the Luwak coffee.
Yeah, it's actually very good.
Yeah, when I was a postdoc, there was.
So this is it.
That's the raccoon dog.
Yeah.
That one doesn't eat coffee beans.
I don't think so. I
Doesn't
mean, maybe it does.
Doesn't look like it.
It's a member of the canid family. It's also...
It's a beautiful.
Let's go with that. Back to where you were. A group that also includes domestic dogs, and the only member that hibernates. Oh, wow. They hibernate. Interesting. But here's the problem. Sagar and Jetty was actually explaining this to me on Saturday night. He was like, there's direct evidence of people being infected that predates this establishment of this animal testing positive in that wet market. So I guess people were eating that animal. Is that the idea? But many months before that, people were sick from this. Like, this is, what was this in? I believe it was in December of 2019. Is that what they're saying? November or December of 2019.
And it was March 2020 when everything kind of blasted, right?
Yeah, but it was September or August of 2019 when the first people were infected. So it predates it by a considerable amount.
I think the lab leak hypothesis is far more plausible.
Well, the ferment cleavage site, this thing that they've established that it seems to indicate that this virus was manipulated. Like, this is the furin cleavage site, excuse me.
Yeah, there too, we hear about gain-of-function research, and now everyone associates gain-of-function with gain-of-function of this particular virus. But gain-of-function research happens all the time in essentially every laboratory in the U.S. and abroad that does mouse genetics. You knock out a gene, and you ask what happens to this animal in the absence of a gene, and then you knock it in, and you see if it replaces that. Because in humans, human genetics is only loss of function. You don't have the option yet. CRISPR will allow this to put things back in that are missing. And so gain-of-function research is extremely common. I mean, we do it in we're no longer working on animals, to be clear. We only do human studies now. But this is something that you're trained to do as a postdoc. Everyone learns loss of function, gain of function. You need to do both. The gain of function, actually, there is that one CRISPR experiment, speaking of interesting science out of China. A guy, he actually was a postdoc at Stanford, worked for a guy named Steve Quake, and then separately on his own, without permission or anything from Stanford, went off and started his own laboratory in China. And stood up at a meeting a few years ago and said he had done CRISPR in human babies. This has been done.
Yeah, he was arrested for this, right?
Yeah, he mutated the HIV receptor, which everyone thinks, okay, that was designed to prevent these babies from getting HIV. It turns out that that mutation is thought to perhaps enhance memory by sort of parallel mechanisms. And then it was very unclear for a short while whether or not this guy was either going to get a Nobel Prize or whether or not they were going to throw him in jail. And so everyone is very tense and waiting in my community, thinking, okay, because when somebody's kind of up for a big discovery like this, everyone kind of circles maybe wanting that maybe they should be involved in getting the accolades. But as the moment that the international community, I think rightfully so, said, this is horrible, you can't do this, there's no ethics committee, you need to think about what you're doing, everyone was like, I had nothing to do with this guy, I never had anything. And there was a deep excavation of emails and all sorts of, everyone was like, I got nothing to do with this guy. So it was pretty interesting. Then China said, oh, we're gonna punish him. But I'd be willing to bet both hands that his punishment consists of a jail cell that is pretty luxurious with a laboratory. There's no question that CRISPR is going on there. CRISPR is going on in certain regions of other locations on the globe where things aren't as regulated. Because think about the potential payoff for being able to rescue a Huntington's mutation, right? A Huntington's chorea mutation that has somebody at some point in their life, unable to control their arms, hemiballismus of the arms.
What is it?
Huntington's disease. It's a deterioration of the parts of the brain that control motor function. The parts of the brain that control motor function have two main pathways. One is a go pathway, like reach for this coffee mug. And the other one is a no-go pathway, resisting movement. And the no-go pathway degenerates substantially, other things too. And people with Huntington's chorea end up with these writhing ballistic movements. And it's an inherited disease, so you know what gene. It's the Huntington gene. And if you know that for instance, a parent has it, you can get tested for it. A lot of people don't want to get tested. They don't want the answer because it's late onset. So you can be normal a certain portion of your life and then get it. It's a tragic disease. But if you test positive for this gene, you know you're going to get Huntington's. In which case, with CRISPR, you could just put the gene back in and rescue the function.
What causes someone to eventually succumb to that disease? If it's a late onset disease, if they don't have it when they're young and they develop when they get older, what changes?
Yeah, so it's not just deterioration of those particular neurons, it's deterioration of the neurons that control those neurons, and everything's working in a kind of a top-down suppression all the time. In fact, the head neurosurgeon at Neuralink, who's somebody I know quite well named Matthew McDougall. He came up through my laboratory, and Elon made a great choice in hiring him. Told me recently the best way to think about the frontal cortex is that basically its main job, besides picking context and strategy for a given situation, is to tell certain parts of your brain that really want to do things, shh. That's the best description I've ever heard of prefrontal cortex. You know, it's what's keeping Jamie from doing things that he shouldn't right now, and me doing things that I shouldn't right now. And every time you have a crazy idea, like maybe I should jump off this bridge, why would I think that? I'm not. That's a healthy operation of your brain saying, I want to because I'm kind of curious, but I don't want to, so I'm not going to.
Right.
With Huntington's, what happens is there's slow deterioration of those neurons, but there's a lot of deterioration of these neurons that control motor function. And eventually what happens is the deeper neurons that control motor function start shutting down the autonomic functions like breathing, heart rate. And so eventually people just succumb to some basic, we call them housekeeping functions, so they'll have to be on a respirator, and they have to, they have to use a catheter tube, and, they have to defecate into a bag. And, at some point they just become a deteriorated mess of neurons. So what's first to go there, however, is the control of motor function. And it goes first in the direction of too much activity because of all these brakes and accelerators that we have in the brain. So in any case, CRISPR, gene manipulation of the sort that this guy did in his laboratory in China, again, I think an ethics committee needs to tell the world or decide for the world what people should be allowed to do and not do. But you can imagine for something like Huntington's, it would be tremendously advantageous. Like if you had a child who you knew was someday going to get Huntington's, you'd want to do a CRISPR mutation and put the healthy gene back.
Is there anything that's been shown to slow down the progress of Huntington's?
There I'm not so versed. It's a little bit like MS, another neurodegenerative disease, multiple sclerosis, where lack of inflammation are also cousins in terms of receptors, neural circuits, this kind of thing.
So can spicy food cause inflammation?
Sure. Yeah.
Really?
Yeah. But I think one of the best ways to think about inflammation, and here I definite hat tip to Lane Norton, who we both know, and Andy Galpin, who both really impressed upon me the fact that if we were to measure somebody's blood pressure, inflammatory markers, heart rate, and cortisol during a hard workout, and you didn't know they were doing a hard workout, I just handed you the data, and you're a medical doctor, you'd say, this person's dying. Right. So inflammation is robust during hard exercise. But I think what's so incredible about the human body is that the increase in blood pressure, inflammation, etc., is what triggers the adaptation so that blood pressure and inflammation, etc., are all much lower the other 23 hours of the day. And so there's something special about our system whereby, maybe if you had really hot peppers, like the most famous of these is the Carolina Reaper. You know about this? The Carolina Reaper.
I have some in my hot sauce. Yeah. Senor Lechuga made me this trio of hot sauces. There's Reapers in there.
Is that a person or a brand? Senor Lechuga?
It's a brand.
Okay.
Yeah. There's 3 hot sauces that we developed. One of them is my friends over at Half Face Blades. They developed this one that I really like, so he added that to my little 3 collection, and it's like, I think it's Reapers, sun-dried tomatoes, and some other stuff, and truffles. It's really good.
Amazing.
Yeah, and then he's got 2 other ones. One of them with habanero, but there it is. Those are the 3. Yeah. So if you like hot shit, I like it hot. This stuff is like legit. So one of them is.
In 500 meters, turn right onto Grabenstädter Steig.
Tomatoes, winter truffles, and Reapers. That's the Half Face Blades cooperative. And then the other one is, I don't even know how to say that word. Chulacale. Chulacale.
I'm not good. I'm going to be in Teck. that spice. And here I always want to make sure I give proper attribution. The Nobel Prize was given a couple of years ago to a guy down at the Scripps Institute in San Diego, Ardem Patabuchin, and David Julius at UCSF for the discovery of these receptors for pressure, cool, heat. And it's an amazing set of discoveries that just occurred really in the last 10 years. We know that all of those pathways go to areas of the brain that are involved in, of course, like behavior. Like if you touch something really hot, you taste something really hot, for most people, they're going to resist that. But also to the hypothalamus, which houses all these hormone control areas, etc. People who can tolerate stronger spice, men and women, we know it's correlated with higher levels of circulating testosterone. That, I think, is interesting. What we're really talking about is higher pain threshold. And you and I have talked before about if there's one clear effect of testosterone, it's that it makes effort feel good. That pain starts to have a little bit of a come hither kind of thing to it. It feels a little bit enticing when testosterone levels are elevated. When testosterone levels are lower, or if people have lower levels of testosterone, effort feels more overwhelming. How's that? And the other thing is that ingestion of spicy peppers resets your calibration for what's spicy. I think we know that too. And in a way that also adjusts people's pain threshold. So if people get better eating hot peppers, they're better dealing with all types of pain. And I find this fascinating because I know you and I are both kind of obsessed with the ice baths and cold plunges. Yeah. And I've been going deep into that literature around cold and what's really known about cold thermogenesis and not known. And it seems like these acute adrenaline, acute pain pathways, they do exactly what exercise does, which is in the moment, if you were to measure somebody's inflammation, etc., you'd say this person is dying. They're in a terrible state. They might as well be getting, open heart surgery with no anesthesia, the way some people react to the ice bath. It's kind of silly to us, but for people that don't like the cold, they're like, you gotta be kidding me. I'd never go near it. They try to disparage it. They try to poke every hole in the data. They're just scared, right? Yeah. They're just scared. We know this. But they are actually the people that benefit the most because that really acute adrenaline spike, that pain that you feel, creates a higher pain threshold later, higher threshold for work output, all the things that most people seek. And so to me, it's always interesting that you have to look at what's happening during and you have to look at what's happening after. And for some reason, as humans, we like these creature comforts of massages, which are great. The sauna, which is great, although if you crank it up really hot, it's work at some level.
It's always work at the end.
There's that
the
moment.
Last 5 minutes of a 25-minute.
In 300 meters, turn left onto Boehringer Strasse.
Especially at 190 degrees, that's work.
Yeah, and there's something about the burning in the nose for me. At least my heart rate starts like I want to get the hell out.
Burning in the nose. So are you using water on the rocks a lot?
Yeah.
So that's what's giving you the burning in the nose?
Yeah, it's always hard to know how hot it is, right?
Turn left onto Boehringer Strasse.
At the place where it reaches your body, I've been cranking way, way up.
Like what temperature?
Like 260.
What?
260, but I cover
260.
But I cover my head.
Why?
So
what are you, a brisket?
No,
what the fuck are you doing?
Well, what I found is.
Why are you doing that?
So what's interesting is your design.
Continue for 1.5 kilometers.
To get out of the hot tub, or the too hot tub is because of burning on the skin, right? But the desire to get out of the sauna is usually a brain thing. You'll notice this because if you go to a Russian banya, they all wear the little wool hats. Yeah. That's to insulate their brain against the heat, so they can stay in at hotter temperatures in their body. So I'm in at 260, but I've got my head covered with a wool cap, so it doesn't feel as stressful. But I'm doing it because I like to sweat.
But if it doesn't feel as stressful, wouldn't it have less of a positive effect?
Okay, so this is great because what you're starting to do is tease out the variables. So thermogenesis heats you up. Metabolism, subject.
Continue for 1.5 kilometers. Continue for... L245. Continue for 6 kilometers. B465. Turn left onto Seetelstrasse, B465. Continue on B465 for 5 kilometers. Lichtensteinstrasse, B465. In 500 meters, turn left onto Karlstrasse, Lichtensteinstrasse. Onto Karlstrasse, Lichtensteinstrasse. In 600 meters, at the roundabout, continue straight to stay on B465.